Some water. Do you need anything?
I'm good, thank you. Okay, everyone, we can get started when everyone is ready. We'll call to order our study session for Tuesday, April 26th. We just have one item on our agenda this evening, and that is the 2023 preliminary budget presentation from the amazingly talented, wonderful Kelly Faust.
I'm not in charge of payroll.
I couldn't think of any other adjectives at the moment, I'm sorry.
I'm not in charge of payroll. I just do the back end stuff. But thank you. I'm glad to be here with you tonight. And as you know, we're covering our budget study session. So first opportunity to talk publicly about the budget. And I have just some overall information to go through and then open it up for questions and discussion with council. Let's see. I'm clicking on the clicker, but it's not advancing. I'll phone a friend. Oh, perfect. Thank you, phone a friend. It's good to have friends in high places. We have, starting out with Gilbert is best in class, and we have a lot of accolades. Some recent ones that we've received are best place to live in Arizona, best city for remote workers, most caring city in Arizona, which is fantastic, best city for first-time home buyers, most prosperous large city, and always second safest. So a fabulous community with good high services and good expectations. As part of our budget process, we do our zero base every year, a third of the organization, and this year's results have $560,000 of additional savings, so a total since 2018 of $9.2 million of taxpayer savings. The departments that participated this year were several of the general fund departments, wastewater, fleet, and the self-insurance funds. Fleet and self-insurance did have some increases with their zero base because some of their base costs providing just their regular level of service increased. The O&M costs in fleet and in self-insurance, we had the cancer insurance for the firefighters that was added to that area. So the budget process is long. As you know, it takes all year to go through our budget process. Starting off in mid-September with our kickoff, all of the departments get together, put their business cases together and request what they believe they will need for the upcoming fiscal year. Analysts review it for any quality control or questions, any missing information or additional data that could be added. Our executive team takes a month and reviews that information, deliberates each and every budget package, and then it goes on. They present a recommendation to Patrick in the town manager's office. Patrick makes additional changes, and then, as you know, we bring the budget to you and recommend, after all of that has been considered, that we have our study session tonight, preliminary adoption in May, and then final adoption in June. For the requested versus recommended, there was about $68 million of total requests across all of the funds in the town. And we are recommending tonight, as part of the proposed budget, about $52 million of that. It's about three-fourths of what has been requested we're recommending to fund in the budget here. So you can see there's still a lot on the cutting room floor of the needs in the town, but we do our best to manage that balance of funds and providing services. Here's the breakout of where that $52 million is across all of the funds. One of the things to note for the upcoming year is about once every 14 years, there are 27 pay periods instead of 26 pay periods in the budget cycle. Next year happens to be one of those years. And so there's about $7 million across all of the funds for that additional pay period in the upcoming year. That'll just be a one-time, and then 14 years from now, we'll have that happen again. But that is part of the increase that you'll see here across all of those funds. And then a balance of one-time and ongoing needs. There has been quite a bit of cost escalation, especially in the enterprise funds, and that is reflected here with the increases they need for supplies, for the tipping fees, for the contracts in the Neely and Greenfield wastewater treatment plants in all of the areas that we're seeing. So the departments have requested what they need to continue to provide those services with the increased cost if they weren't part of zero base. The recommended for general fund has the maintaining service levels is our greatest area of focus. We have a little bit on the new service levels, about just over $2 million of that is associated with some, had it in my head, and then it's been a very busy day. And I usually have it on printed paper.
Happens to me all the time.
Sorry, PD incentive program, patrol automatic defibrillators, and the CPR mechanical assistance. We've had a whole bunch of things going on, so that's what's in the new level of service. The life cycle replacement has mostly about $2 million of the MDC, the mobile computer devices replacement in the police department. So a lot of replacement needs and then maintaining our service levels. For the streets and enterprise, you can see by and far it is maintaining the service levels, and most of that is with cost escalations for what we're seeing in the industry just to keep continued service, and as we continue to grow and need to continue to provide service for the new residents, because we are continuing to see those new businesses and residents come into Gilbert, which is fantastic. For the recommended positions, we have 79 total recommended positions. There were 107 positions in total that were requested. So this is about 74% of the total requested positions that we're recommending funding here. Majority of them are in the police and fire areas. You can see 22 FTE and 2 LTA, so 24 total positions in police, and then the 19 positions in fire. Across most of the organization, just a few positions here and there, mostly keeping up with the additional services and growth. If we compare our FTE per thousand, we have to look at last year's numbers for the other communities because they're working on their budgets right now just like we are, and so they don't have comparable data yet on what their upcoming budget will be. They're at various parts in their budget process. But if we look at last year's FTE per thousand population, we can see Gilbert is about 5.89, and the next closest is Chandler at just over 6. If we look at the positions that have been requested or proposed in the budget for 2023, if we add those and the population projection based off of the new permits that happened over the last 18 months, what we believe the population will be for next year, that ratio comes out to about 6 FTE per 1,000 population. So you can see that we're still very much on the low end of the valley for how much staffing we have compared to the population and services that exist. One of the other large areas of change for the upcoming budget is in our capital improvement area. And here you can see the different areas where we are planning to have capital improvement, same as in past years: streets, municipal facilities, stormwater, etc. Last year we had about $425 million of planned projects. And most of the difference for the new projects, if we look at the carry forward, so existing projects that we're currently working on and will continue to work on because they're multi-year projects, about $360 million of carry forward. The new projects are mostly in those areas where we're bonding, which makes sense because we'll have the funding secured to be able to work on those projects. So in the streets improvements, the new projects is $193 million, and we're issuing about $200 million of streets bonds. So we'll begin work on those projects. And then the second area are the water improvements, $400 million of new projects. Most of that's associated with the North Water Treatment Plant rebuild, which will be going into the main construction phases and issuing a lot more of the contracts and need more of that money. We won't spend all of that money in next year's budget. As always, we budget the full amount, so we know that we can complete the projects, but it will take us several years to work through those projects to completion, from the design and construction and completion. So in total for the budget, you can see that the non-CIP area has about $57 million of increases. Remember, about $7 million of that is associated with the 27th pay period for the upcoming year. We have the enterprise funds, the internal services. Most of that changes because you'll remember we're taking the general government, the risk insurance, into its own fund. So that's being reported in that internal service fund where it didn't used to be reported there. Let me get to those notes. Also in the internal service fund, we're budgeting a higher amount for claims because we've been seeing the higher claims in the health insurance, dental, and workers' comp areas. So that's about $3 million there. And then about $1 million of increases in the fleet area between additional staff to help with the growing vehicles, and also the increased parts and labor costs are happening there. So lots of things happening. The debt service line is $14 million higher, and that's the debt service that's associated with the new transportation bonds and then the water resource MPC bonds that will be asking council about tonight. So if anything changes on that, we would make the reflection in the budget. The Water Resource MPC did recommend approval or approve the bonds last night. So this reflects that anticipation. And then you can see the change on the CIP area, about $625 million more in the upcoming year compared to the current fiscal year 22. We have the property tax. So the levy that's proposed is $29.6 million, and that's the amount we would need to cover the debt service payments for the upcoming year. It does reflect the decreasing tax rate that we've had over the last couple of decades. It used to be up around $1.15 per $100 of assessed value. We've been down around 99 cents. This would be the 5th year in a row, and that is in alignment with what was told to voters when we asked about the transportation bonds. Is the intent to keep that rate at 99 cents to be able to repay that debt. So making good on that indication to voters. So tonight we have our budget study session, opportunity for question and answer and direction from council. Preliminary budget will incorporate that direction, and it will be on May 17th. We'll have the public hearing, and then on June 14th would be final budget adoption. And with that, I'll ask if you've got any questions.
Thank you, Kelly. Who wants to jump in first with any questions? Councilmember Kaprowski.
Hi, Kelly. Thank you for the presentation. You mentioned that in Gilbert, when you're showing those projects in the CIP and you put those new projects in, you're actually putting the full amount of that project within that first year. Is that typical, like if it was going to be compared to other communities?
It is somewhat unique to Gilbert, where we do make sure that we have that full amount to finish, that we don't have to wonder or scrape up money as the bills come in, but we know when we have it set aside. By setting it aside and having that full budget there, it also makes sure that the funding doesn't inadvertently get allocated towards something else or show on the books as unspent or unallocated funds. We know where that's going to, and so we feel like it's more transparent, but it isn't terribly consistent or common across the state.
Thank you. And one other question relates to when looking at the total budget, how much is going into reserves or carryover funds?
For general fund or for all of the funds?
For all of the funds.
We do have our transfers into reserves. We maintain for minimum fund balance, 3 months of operating and 1 year of debt service, but then we also have our repair and replacement funds that we set aside to make sure that we can maintain our infrastructure. I don't know that I have all of those added up off the top of my head, but I could get that number for you.
Sure, thank you.
This is a great opportunity to take those questions and keep track of them and then meet with Kelly between now and the next meeting also. Who would like to ask Vice Mayor? Do you have questions?
Just a couple. So on one of the one-time projects, we've got the $7 million going to the university building. Does that clean up the rest of the outstanding debt service, or what does that leave us if not?
Thank you, Vice Mayor. Let me make sure I understand the question. We do have an additional $7 million going over into a sinking fund, saving up money to be able to pay off the university debt early. We don't yet have enough to pay off the university debt, and it's not callable until July 1, 2025. So we can't make that early payment until that time.
And what's left to pay it off?
We have about $33 million, if I remember right, and I think we've saved up with the $7 million about 12. So we're making good progress towards that.
I also had a question on one of the general fund revenue slides. I just noticed on the investment income, previous years we were making anywhere between $1 million or $1.5 million, almost $2 million in 2020, and then projected for 2022 and then 2023, 500,000. I just didn't know why that was.
We always project the investment income low, just to make sure if there are changes in the economy that's captured. But yes, it usually comes in higher than what we project there. Rates in the past while have been lower. I do anticipate they'll go up this next year and that we would get a higher amount than that.
I don't know. If anybody else wants to jump in. Okay. Let me try to find what page this was on. Are we in the new vehicles that we're purchasing? Maybe this is a question for Chief, but was I correct in reading this, that we're bringing into circulation 2 more ambulances?
Chief can help answer that. I believe they're replacements.
Mayor and Council, those requests are for replacement ambulances. We have 2 reserve ambulances that we'll be replacing, and then there's one additional one we'll be purchasing so that we have a 50% backup rate for the ambulances, which we're seeing already and providing the service that we have some issues with downtime and maintenance and so on, and making sure we have enough ambulances. So it's really achieving 2 things: replacing existing ambulances or reserve ambulances that we've had for several years, and then adding an additional one to ensure we have the correct number to provide service.
How old is the one that we're replacing?
I think they're about 5 years old. Yeah. And just as a reminder, when we bought those 2 originally, those were stock ambulances. They didn't come with any of the safety features that we provided in the other ambulances. They weren't as, they're not as flexible for us to use in transporting as the newer ones. So we're trying to make our fleet all the same, so if we go into a reserve ambulance, that we're not essentially downgrading the service that we provide.
And then the additional one, is that factored into the kind of original case study? Are we going to see kind of an updated, as far as, what the upfront investment is?
So the replacement will come out of the replacement fund that we already have, and then the other one will be in addition to that and added to the operating costs that we have. So it'll just be included in that. So as we go through those years that we talked about originally, to catch up and pay down the debt and all of that, that'll be included in that.
In that 8 years?
We think, yeah, give or take, yeah. Yeah.
Councilmember Tilkey.
Thanks, Mayor. If I could just piggyback on that. What is the typical life cycle for an ambulance? Sorry, Chief, I didn't realize you'd walked away.
And the first 2 that he was referring to were the ones that were purchased for the pilot program. They're not the same as the ambulances that we have purchased now as part of the service that we provide.
Correct. The ones that we're purchasing now, that we purchased last year, we expect those to last anywhere from 7 to 10 years, depending on the amount of service that they provide and how many miles we put on them and so on.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Any other comments, questions? Yes, Vice Mayor.
Maybe this is a question for the other chief, but on our, let's see, kind of CIP into the future, I know for 23 we've got a very small amount budgeted for the crime lab. I'm assuming that's a study. And then in the outgoing years, much more substantial investment. I'm curious, if there's going to be additional either study sessions, or I'm just curious if, what kind of comes out of that, depending on how we scope it. I think that's policy driven, depending, whether we're doing this ourselves, whether we're in joint partnership with others, whether we're doing a PPP.
Mayor, and
find a question in there.
No problem. I think I've got it. Mayor Peterson and Vice Mayor Yentes referenced the CIP regarding the crime lab. That's projected. There have been no funds committed to that yet. We will be coming back to you with additional information on the crime lab. Probably in a study session in the fall, and then in the spring financial retreat for some deeper dive into those financials of what that would look like. So it's on the projected 5-year CIP budget, but no funds have been committed yet. Correct.
Just for
Sorry.
this small amount.
125 for this study. Yep.
Any other comments, questions? Yes, Councilmember Anderson.
Kelly, do you have a graphic that shows year by year the amount we save in zero-based budgeting?
I don't in this presentation, but I do in the packet of information that you received earlier.
Yeah.
I don't know if there's a way to project that.
I'm just thinking that I'd like to see that in years to come actually being part of the presentation. I'd like the general public to understand what that is, what we do each year, and what that savings is.
I can add that to the preliminary budget presentation so that we have that opportunity.
Thank you.
That's a great comment, Councilmember Anderson. Yes, Councilmember Kaprowski.
I have one more question, Kelly. If there's a project currently shown in the CIP, but it's in a future year and not currently funded, that at council direction we wish to remove, when is the time to give that direction, or what's the process for that?
This would be a good opportunity to give that direction if there's a specific project that you want to discuss. And then at direction of council, we could remove that before preliminary budget and reflect that or make a change that you wanted.
Okay. I like to bring the topic up to you and the other council members. We've received some messages from our residents in the southern part of the town regarding Hunt Highway, which was presented in the Transportation Master Plan, and we got information back that that project had been, placed in the general plan and Transportation Master Plan many years ago. But since that time, there's been a lot of regional projects such as SR 24. We have the Ocotillo Road project going in with Ocotillo Road Bridge. Riggs Road currently is the regional artery that connects east and west. So I would like to propose that because of those reasons, to actually remove that particular project of Hunt Highway from the CIP so that we can really reevaluate and put those funds towards some other project with greater need.
Thanks. I think I look at it a little differently. That when you look at Hunt Highway and the fact that there is a casino being built just there by Gilbert Road, even though that's not in Gilbert, there may be additional growth on that side of the road, which isn't under our control, so that's under the reservation. And my fear is that if we take this project out now, residents will see that as a guarantee for the future that we would never be evaluating that road. And future councils are going to have to deal with that, putting that back in if there is a need for it. So I understand what you're saying, of course, and I just have a concern about taking something that is projected 10 or more years forward, just taking it out and like it's not even going to be a point of discussion in the future. Perhaps we're sending the wrong message to the residents. So that's my only concern with it.
Councilmember Anderson, any comments on that?
I was just going to mention it is plus 10 years out, so that gives us plenty of time to evaluate that if we need to in the future. It can be moved out further if we need to.
Vice Mayor, any comments?
I mean, I've flagged a number of them, not specific to that point, that, I mean, I would love to either put into way future years or to have removed completely. But I don't want to cut off any more conversation about this until there's a resolution. And maybe there's somebody from Streets who can talk a little bit more about the project.
Councilmember Hendricks, any comments?
No, I'm good, thank you.
I hesitate to remove something that is a placeholder and has in fact been in that spot for so long that we're going to have major changes in that area coming up completely out of our control with the development of the casino off Gilbert Road. And I know we've been having the discussion for quite some time about Hunt Highway. I agree with Councilmember Tilke that if we remove it, that it's going to be a shock to our residents later if a council needs to put it back into the CIP. We don't have dollars actually allocated to it today, correct? It's just projected for the future.
Mayor, that's correct. We don't have anything in the fiscal 23 budget. It's about $78 million out in the plus 10 years with unidentified funding. It would have to have funding identified to be able to move forward.
And that could end up being regional funding. It could be a combination of things that we don't know what that might potentially look like. I'd be hesitant to remove such a potentially large project from the scope. Councilmember Karbowski, further comments?
The only further comments is I understand that perspective, but I guess from my perspective, given the history and just the land use and the kind of ownership of the land, that's where I was probably looking at it more from just knowing that there were other alternate routes that were going to serve the region, because it just doesn't seem like that's really going to be a viable route. And then with the watershed off of the mountains, needing that property for other like drainage improvements and other, capital improvements.
I'd at least need a presentation on that, because that's a big one. And I think to remove it at this point, after it's been there for so long, I would need to see some good reasons as to why to remove that project. Yeah. And if you have them, that's great. I know transportation engineers are king, or they think they are. Just kidding. I saw that on TV last night. But I need to know what great reasons we would have to remove it, to take that out of the plan and not have our residents feel, or have our residents have a sense of this will never happen, because once we take it out, that is the absolute sense that they will gain.
Right.
Yeah.
Could we provide direction to staff to perhaps reevaluate some of the, or I think we had staff presented a priority and worked with the Citizens Transportation Task Force to identify the priority of immediate need in the town. But perhaps we can provide staff with some direction to begin looking at some of those long-range needs and come back to us to let us know if they recommend any additional changes or shifts to those projects now that there's been changes to the region.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think that can happen over the next year, so that won't impact this particular budget. But I do think that that's a great idea to look at some of those longer-term projects. And I think, Vice Mayor, that may be some of the issues that you wanted to bring up.
Yeah.
That if we could get especially a list of the ones that we have concerns about, that would help give them a baseline for coming back and talking with us.
Yeah, if you have specific things, I would submit them probably to Kelly, so that she's the gatekeeper of all of that information, and then we could potentially take a look at those things. And maybe some can be moved out. And I know that they're constantly reevaluating projects, constantly, and some get moved back, and some get moved up, and some get moved back, and some get moved up. So it's a big puzzle, and they're always trying to fit the pieces in the right way.
Mayor Peterson, Councilmember September is online and would like to comment.
Oh, thank you, Chiavelli. Councilmember September, please go ahead.
Hello, can you hear me okay?
We can. You're a voice from above.
Well, I agree with Councilmember Krakowski. I too have seen a lot of emails from Gilbert residents in that part of town. There seems to be a lot of concern, and when I look at the different reports that are available and the studies we have, I don't see the benefit. And so if we're looking for, ways to fit the puzzle pieces into a budget, even if it's long term, it seems to me it would be easier to fit less puzzle pieces into the same spot if we take one out. So I would entertain an opportunity for staff to present pros and cons to this proposed route. And yeah, I know it's in the future, but I'd like to see, does it really need to be on our radar at all?
Thanks, Councilmember September. I would agree with you both on many locations. I'm just concerned with what's going to happen with the construction of that casino and things that might come out of that construction that we don't foresee and could happen in the future. And so I'd be really hesitant to remove it this year. I'd want to see that casino be open and up and running and see what that leads to in that Hunt Highway area, because it's going to change traffic no matter what happens. And so is that going to become a bigger issue that we're not seeing something? And so I would definitely want to hold off on that. But I suggest making a list of the projects that you would like to submit and have those evaluated, or let you know where those stand. For sure. Does that work, Kelly? Yes. Any other comments, questions about the budget? Yes, Vice Mayor.
I wanted to circle back on the crime lab, just because we do have, a substantial amount budgeted in 2027, and I just simply think that sends the wrong message to have, when we haven't determined what on the CIP, I'm still on the CIP. When we haven't determined what direction, it looks like it's a foregone conclusion, or we've already got predetermined conclusions about this before we've had a policy discussion about the direction we're going and then had any study done on it. And so I just think on some of these things, when we do put, before we've established the policy, I just think that sends the wrong message.
Kelly, do you have any comment on that? Or Chief, since you moved back down here again?
We do try and put projects in for planning purposes into the future, and then put our best guess of the estimate there. In the project description, we mentioned that we'll have to study the design and the construction, so those numbers we know would change, and it's also based off of council's decision in the future if you want to do the project or not. So if we don't want to consider a crime lab at all, then we would want to take it out. If we want to consider it in the future, then it helps us be able to prepare for possibilities in that area.
My point being, if council decides, yes, we want a crime lab, but we don't want to build this ourselves and we want to engage a private provider, this would not be the number reflected in this document.
I was wondering if, in this particular case, because the crime lab is new, we've had just one presentation, I understand the importance of putting it in the CIP. Is there a way to color code it or something that it stands out that no decision's been made? It's a new project that might help the public better understand that while we've got a placeholder, the decision hasn't been made. I don't know if that complicates things for the other projects, but I was trying to just address Vice Mayor's concern that people may think we've already made the decision and we haven't.
I think we've had this conversation in the past, and it does get confusing when we're trying to add a placeholder to this extremely large document for items that could potentially come forward. And I know that this council, it was their first presentation, but I believe Chief has presented on Crime Lab before that. And so it is something that has been discussed a couple of times, and we want to be ahead of the game and not behind the game, so make sure we have a placeholder, but it doesn't in fact have any dollars allocated to it. So I see Councilmember Tilkey's point. How do we designate that in the CIP that these are items that are not funded? Is there something in there that explains that more clearly?
Vice Mayor, I'll answer a prior question. I'll let Kelly hit that one. This is very similar to how we've listed the Advocacy Center in the CIP forecast. We had listed that in the past, I think, 3 years as a projected about 4 to 5 years out. And we did have the opportunity to get alternative funding through the CARES money. to fund that, and that's an example where we could extract it out. But I'll let Kelly explain how we can address the star next to it.
Thanks, Chief and Council. We can definitely add some additional language into the project description that gets published with the CIP, making sure to know we're in the early stages. This is not a final project or has not been decided the full scope if this would be contracted out or build a facility, that's still up for discussion. And then the project that's in here now, I believe we looked at not the lowest cost or the highest cost option, but the middle cost option with partnership potential funding offsetting some of the cost and revenues coming in as well. So trying to balance that, how do we put in a middle range option for planning purposes to give us a best guess or option about the future to be able to move from?
I guess my conversation would probably be better directed at my colleagues up here, is if people feel comfortable from a policymaker standpoint. This is 5 years out, and 4 to 5 years out, and obviously every couple of years we have elections, and there's always potential for substantial changes for who's driving policy. And I guess that's my question, is if we're going to indicate the level of investment that this shows on paper and then communicate that in public documents to our constituents, this begs the question, who's driving policy decisions? And I guess that's my frustration with this, is I understand there's a placeholder, but none of this level vetting has occurred to the level of would even determine that this is even in the ballpark range, other than if we've just already decided kind of at a staff level that this is kind of what we assume is going to happen. And if everybody's okay with that, then okay, but that's my concern.
I would say that we have had the discussion, and the council has had the discussion to at least look at this for potential in the future and different opportunities. So to have the placeholder in place was said by the council. If we had said in our discussion, absolutely not, we don't want to consider a crime lab at all 100%, then I could see it being removed from the CIP. But I think we had the discussion leading to the placeholder being added to the CIP. Patrick, did you have something to add?
Mayor, Vice Mayor, members of the council, I was just going to add, with our budget document, especially those 5-year projections, they are just that. The only thing that's formally approved is whatever is upcoming in the next fiscal year. Anything in those future years could change at any point, but what we do try to do is forecast out different scenarios that we believe may be happen sometime within that 5-year period. But we could certainly provide clarity that this is just a placeholder as we continue to evaluate this potential project and the number of different paths it could take. That's certainly not an indication that this is the decision that's been made or how we will approach it. We could end up staying in the agreement with Mesa for long term. We could end up having multiple cities come to us and all want to put capital dollars into a project. It's really just for forecasting purposes so that we have an idea of what we should anticipate in the coming 5 years. And then there'll be any number of factors and decisions by the elected board as to what actually gets done.
Any other comments? Councilmember Anderson?
I think what the Vice Mayor is getting at is we need to have the policy discussion before we formalize it in any way, and I'm comfortable with that. If we need to have some sort of formal discussion, I know we've had discussions in the past about it, and that's why we move forward with it, but if we need to formalize that in some way as a policy item, which may give us more solid footing for the putting it in the CIP and for the public to see it and understand that as a policy matter, we have decided that we're going to go forward with this. Right now, I can see what she's saying is that it's not clear to the public, but we're putting the money in for it, but it hasn't been clear enough yet.
Yeah, I don't have a problem with it being listed, I have a problem with the allocations in 26, 27 that are a holding pattern without there. And I know we've had preliminary discussions, but I'm in none of those, and maybe I'm just misrecalling, did I think that we had come to any level of specificity in conclusions of what that would mean that would justify putting, I mean, I feel like we literally don't even have enough information to determine that in 26, 27, this is what this looks like, unless we've determined the route we're going to go. That would be the only thing that informs this number. So that's just my 2 cents, and I have no problem with it being listed in the document itself, but what we're putting in future funding.
Councilmember Tilke, I see your finger.
Thanks. I was trying to go. My mind always goes to the logistics of everything, so that's why I sit here sometimes with that look on my face, trying to figure out how do we fix this, because I do agree with what you're saying, and I don't think that there's many times that a new project to this level comes forward in a year before a discussion has been had. And so I'm looking at it from the staff perspective of we have to have these numbers in place to present the budget so we have a better understanding. In this particular case, we haven't had the policy discussion to say we're at that point that we want you to start allocating dollars and all of that. So I guess where I'm going with all of this is there an opportunity, as Vice Mayor mentioned, to list the project without funding for this particular cycle that says something about we're going to be creating this policy with, this fiscal year, and dollars will be allocated at that time. If we use that process, does that kind of mess up your whole system? That's what I'm trying to get at.
Thank you, Mayor. Councilmember Tilke. No, our intent is to put projects in and reflect them as our best understanding from council on the direction. So it appears maybe we've misunderstood the direction from council after the last retreat. We just picked the middle option. If that is wildly off from what you want to see, we can always put design amount in and leave construction out until that's decided. I'm looking at Patrick to make sure he's not going to fire me tomorrow.
You wish.
But we can do that if that is more reflective of where you feel you're comfortable in the decision-making process and what we should reflect. Then that's what we should put in there as our placeholder, and then continue to do work on what options you are most interested in seeing moving forward, getting additional information from Chief later, and continuing to vet that out, and then we can add the construction or full amount for whatever option you're most interested in next year or at a future time.
I would support Councilmember Anderson's proposal to maybe have a more formal discussion and set the direction, but I agree that at our last retreat, I don't think the council had very strong direction, and I'd be willing to open that up for discussion again.
Okay, I think the problem with having a more formal discussion is our next meeting is our preliminary budget meeting. Mm-hmm. So we're not going to have a lot of time between now and then, actually none. This is a study session. Yes, Patrick.
Mayor, Vice Mayor, members of the council. So if I'm understanding you correctly or hearing you correctly, it's the image or perception of it being in the budget document within that 5-year planning window that somehow people would infer that council has endorsed this path or this choice for this particular project, and that it would send an incorrect, perception in people's minds, but that we're okay with leaving it in the CIP document to have further discussions and to get final direction from council on the path we want to go to. I think that's fine. I think with these 5-year projections, it's always a process of trying to understand what we may and should anticipate in various areas. Sometimes those don't pan out at all, but we do that across all of our major areas, like with parks or with public safety, fire, and police. But if it's just a concern about carrying a number in a 5-year budget forecast, as part of this document, we can certainly pull that out and then leave it in a CIP as a project like we do with many projects, and continue to discuss this and get feedback and direction from council.
Great. I think you probably heard feedback on that one then.
We will take care of that. Thank you.
Perfect. I was just wanted to say that we don't have time to have more policy discussion before our next meeting. And poor Kelly doesn't either, I don't think, with the budget coming up, preliminary budget. Any other comments, questions, concerns? And please, Bill, you can meet with Kelly again between now and our next meeting too. Yes, Councilmember Toki.
Mayor, on that topic, I just want to remind everybody that I believe Chief is coming back in the fall with more information, which would allow us to have that policy discussion. So this takes care of this document, trying to be more transparent with the community, and I think we can move forward on that. Vice Mayor, did you have some other items? I just had one I wanted to ask about.
Oh, well, I mean, along this same vein, there's just a couple other projects, I think that probably would benefit from some additional conversation. Maybe even tonight we'll have an opportunity to do that. Some of these transit stations that are in here as well. So, but we can talk about that more robustly tonight, perhaps.
Great. Councilmember Toki, do you have something?
In the packet that we received, I believe there was some questions regarding the CARES Act money, and there was some suggestions, and I don't know if this is where we need to discuss it. I think you had a meeting with the subcommittee, and perhaps direction was given, but tell me if I'm in the right section or not.
You are. We did have the meeting with the CARE subcommittee. Maybe Councilmember or Vice Mayor Yentes has some suggestions from that. I believe that the committee had consensus about funding the $1.3 million for the dispatch expansion. And then, catch me if I'm wrong or if Robert's had additional discussion. Okay. Then there were some discussions about public safety or fire overtime expenses, potential some nonprofit, and then the system development fee, general government area, being able to sunset that early. Vice Mayor, if you have some additional direction on numbers for the other three.
That was a good summary. Yeah.
Sorry, I didn't get it. So, the committee agreed with the recommendations that were presented, the dollar figures that were presented in the document, or?
There was additional suggestions. So the ones that staff brought forward was the retiring of the government SDFs, and then the additional costs associated with the expansion of the police dispatch. And then on, our agenda tonight, there's additional costs for fire and overtime, so an allocation of the CARES money to cover that instead of general fund. And then I think there was, by all means.
I think that was probably the clarification point, was that the current agenda had the allocation from general funds for the fire overtime, and the subcommittee felt that that specific overtime fell very closely into the purpose of the AZ CARES Act funds, and so wanted that flexibility tonight.
Any other comments, questions? Seeing none, Kelly, I think that might wrap us up.
Very good. I'm available after the meeting or any time before prelim if you have additional questions that I can help with.
Thank you. And I know that so much time goes into this budget, and the preliminary budget meeting is the most important budget meeting because we can't increase the number after that budget meeting. So that's the most important budget meeting. So we'll have a lengthy discussion that evening, I'm sure, robust. And were you with us when we combined the CIP with our budget, or did you come in after that fact? I think it was right after you came in. I mean, we did it right before you came in, right?
Yep, we've always had both CIP and budget.
Put it together. And we did that to create more sense of transparency with the public so that the CIP would be listed with our budget every single year. And it's caused a lot of headaches since we've done it every single year. So increasing transparency doesn't always work out the way you think it's going to. But we appreciate everything you do, Kelly. Thank you. Okay, that's all we had on our study session agenda, so I'll go ahead and adjourn the meeting. Thanks, everybody.